There we go.
Hi, so yeah, my name's Gary Picodner. I'm the program manager for the weather technology in the Cockpit group. And I see, as usual, and I do it too, people like to sit in back and either make a quick exit or you're worried that, hey, it's the FAA, I want to make sure. We are research, which probably a lot of people here may not even know the FAA does research. We have nothing to do with citing you on violations. If you've done anything with weather that you want to talk about, we can't get you into trouble. We are researchers, and our objective in this program is what we do is basically our goal is to resolve gaps. We try to identify issues based on stories. A lot of things we found are going to fly-ins and just hearing pilots tell us stories where they've gotten into trouble. We identify issues that we think are worth troubleshooting. We put them in a log. And what you're going to see throughout this briefing are what some of those gaps or problems are that we found. And what we call a gap is where we are today and where we think we should be in the future. And then we try to come up with research to figure out how to get to that future point and fix that issue. So you'll see a variety of things. As research, what you're going to see here at farthest will be prototypes. We don't do implementation, we don't do requirements, we do the research, and then we develop what we call MinWxSvc recommendations. Basically, we'll develop recommendations, and we provide those to three different ways. We either give them to pilots directly, and the idea being we're trying to make educated consumers. And for all of you, there's a big advantage to that. If, as the FAA, I go out and tell industry, build something this way, your prices are going to go way up because they have to do it, they got to do it a certain time, and they got to do it our way. And most GA don't really want to see their prices for their equipment or information going sky high. So by educating consumers and driving the market, there's a natural tendency to push these products to get better. And we also make recommendations directly to industry, and we try to give them compelling data from our research that shows this is a better way to do it. And if you implement it this way, you more or less have an endorsement from the FAA that you're doing a design that provides the benefits that the pilots think they're getting. And then we also develop a lot of training materials to help instructors, to help pilots who are interested in weather, and you'll see some of those in the briefing as well. I encourage people, we'd like this to be somewhat interactive. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Like I said, you can't get in trouble. And as well, our briefing material, I've gone through this briefing in like 15 minutes. We intend to have conversations, and we get research ideas, like I said. If there's something you think is a good idea, bring it up and see if other people in the group go, that is a good problem, or we've had trouble with that. We would be interested in it. And that's where we develop research projects from, is actual flight experience. So that gives you a general introduction, and I guess you want to kick off the...
Yeah, so to add to what Gary said, my name is Ian Johnson, and as the person who's narrating this said, I'm an engineering psychologist and human factors lead in the WTIC program, but I'm also a pilot, so I see it from both angles. One of the things that we also do, we're not working isolated or in a vacuum. We work closely with NTSB, so we look at accidents that occur and we try to use some of that scenarios, and we incorporate that into scenarios when we do flight scenarios to do our research. We also work closely with AOPA because they have a very huge membership, and you guys, I'm sure most of you are members, and you contribute to various things that we at the FAA probably don't see, and so we work closely with them, so they're one of the stakeholders. Within the FAA, we have the Flight Standards Group, which they're the ones that put out either test questions or any literature that pilots normally use, even for their flight tests, as well as their written. So we work closely with those people, and we invite them to our meetings, and they're always part of the group that we're working with, because we want to get feedback from people on what we're doing. We don't have all the answers, and hence the reason why we're here. So to piggyback on what Gary said, what you'll see is some of the research that we've done so far. The research that we've done, a lot of it is done in simulators, because we need to ensure that what we're doing is actually applicable to the operational environment that pilots actually operate in. We stress that when pilots are in the simulator, they should actually fly the airplane as though they're flying a real airplane, and I cannot overemphasize that. I fly a lot of the scenarios myself before we actually bring pilots in, and then I don't want to be biased about the scenarios, so I have other pilots actually fly it too and get their feedback, and then we come to consensus before the pilots, or we call them participants, actually come in to fly. So a lot of the stuff that you're going to see here is what we've done, and then there's some of the stuff that we're doing. On the training aspect of it, you'll see that we work on gaps. So we look at gaps in training, gaps in wet information, the ways to disseminate it to pilots, and the problems that pilots have, actually interpreting that information or interpreting that information to make a sound decision or a decision. So those are some of the things you're going to see, and I can't emphasize again, like what Gary said. You are our audience, and we're asking you to be honest with yourself, and if there's something you see that's maybe you don't like, feel free to say, well, maybe you guys didn't think about this or think about that. And we're hoping that you guys will enjoy the forum. I'll turn it back over to Gary. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start here. I guess the one other point that always makes weather interesting is typically within pilots, it's funny, you have two sides. You got the guy who goes, I hate weather. I just hate it. I don't care. I don't like it. And then you got the guy, I'm a weather geek. I take all this. I want to know everything. And that also makes designing products difficult, because some guys will go, just tell me where to go. I don't need to know why. And other guys don't want a box. They want to get all the data. They want every piece of data. They want to look at it and analyze it. So it really becomes a challenge to come up with products and to do things in a manner that support everybody. So you'll see some of those challenges and some of the things we've tried here. So basically a briefing overview. We'll talk about the objectives. I'll give you a quick overview of what the WTIC program is. We'll start describing some of the research tasks, an overview of our research, some of the partners, things we've done, and then some contact information. And believe me, I'm amazed sometimes how many people will make the effort to call us either with ideas or they're interested in some of the research we're doing and they want to find out the results. And we certainly encourage that. We don't get enough email or phone calls that we can't handle it, but I'm often surprised how many people have made the effort to actually track us down because something interests them or they feel they've got really good input. So basically what you'll hopefully learn here, safety hazards and risks associated with gaps in cockpit weather information. And the idea here is we've run a variety of research you'll see. It's to let you guys know what are problems other people are doing. How are accidents or incidents? Just because an accident doesn't occur doesn't mean somebody didn't make a mistake. Sometimes I always used to joke with my daughter when she learned to drive, she'd go, I never got in an accident. I go, you're right, but did you see the 500 accidents she caused behind you? Just because you make a mistake and walk away doesn't mean you weren't just lucky. So we try to identify those things, and we'll try to point some of those out so you can be aware of things that may be a challenge, or you might not be aware. You may be buying a device, and it's not doing what you think you're doing. We want to increase knowledge of the program. We're trying to get outreach out there. We want people to know that the FAA does more than just doing the kinds of enforcement that you're typically used to, and regulations and standards. And we want to give you an idea of some of the research that's coming up so you know what's being done. What we can learn, what can the FAA learn? Like I said, we're trying, and we told you this. We want to find out what you all find, what you need to improve, what you think is not done well by industry, by the FAA. We want to get prioritization for our research. Dollars are limited. We need feedback, and we try to get as much of that as we can. And any hot topics related to weather. There still are issues out there, and we like to hear what people perceive as that. So real quick, what we are is in the research program is we basically do a portfolio of research projects. We develop these recommendations, as I described earlier, that we provide either to pilots, to industry, or in some form of a training module. And what that MinWxSvc is just an expression we coined because it was too hard to keep listing these things. When we talk about that, we're trying to define what's the meta information you need in the cockpit. What's that minimum amount? And if you're a weather geek, you can get tons more, but we want to make sure everybody has access to the information they need to be safe. Then what's the performance of that information? Just because you get it, is the performance, whether it's a reliability, availability, are all those things what's necessary for aviation? It may be good what's on the ground, but we're talking in the cockpit. Is it there? Is it reliable? And is it in the manner you need, again, to be safe? Rendering standards. You'll see some data we have where the information is there, but the way it's rendered in some of the most common commercial products, it wasn't really designed well for a cockpit, and we're finding pilots aren't seeing the information, they're paying for it. They think they're getting something, and they're not recognizing state changes. We call it change blindness. They're unaware when a METAR changes from VFR into IMC, they're missing it because the colors and the designs are too busy and they just don't notice it. And then, like I said, we do enhanced training. WTIC isn't building anything, and we want to emphasize that. We're a research program. We make recommendations, and we provide them to different things. So there's no such thing as a WTIC box or anything like that. And then I guess we've sort of described this a little. Basically, when we do a recommendation to pilots or anyone, what we try to do is we'll define, here's what's wrong. This is the gap or the problem. We'll give a recommendation aimed at whoever it is. We'll either tell a pilot, go out and look for this. We'll tell industry, try to build it this way. But we try to make it clear, what are we recommending? And then we got to provide the data. We've got to convince people, what's the research we have? And we produce evidence that we try to be as objective and scientific as we can to defend our recommendations and to compel a pilot or industry to implement what we're asking them to do. And the recommendations typically have to have enough information for a pilot to know what to look for or for industry to implement it. And you'll see some examples of that. And then we include summaries of the overall research. If somebody doesn't believe us and they want to pull out the reports, and we'll produce those, and they're available online. We put them on the WTIC site. You can pull out some of the recommendations and see what they are. And a lot of them get in magazines. AOPA has published a number of our recommendations, and there's a lot of articles out there for latency and in weather and some other things they've picked up that they view as being very important. And last, before I hand it over to Ian, so basically our objectives as a program, we want to enhance safety by identifying and resolving risks. We're going to try to incorporate these recommendations into some form of standards to help industry where it makes sense. Other times, like I said, it's for the pilot. We want to resolve operational inefficiencies for 121. We don't just do GA work. We also do Part 121 or commercial airline work and 135 business jets. And we want to enhance pilot training to enable effective and consistent adverse weather decision making. I guess we'll let you talk some.
Thanks. Thanks, Gary. So, operational shortfall, safety, and efficiency. So, why does this matter? So, weather is the leading cause of fatal and non-fatal accidents and passengers and crew injuries. And so, advancement in weather information and weather technology are resolving/reducing weather information gaps to enhance safety. Adverse weather is primary cause of potential inefficiencies and flight delays, and there's a list of some of the weather that cause that. How do I change this? Which one? Okay. All right. So now we'll do an overview of the WTIC research. So the first one here we call this general aviation MET standardization. Now I just want to dwell on the word standardization. We're not trying to standardize anything. We're just looking for consistency. So basically, if one vendor is displaying information using a certain color, and that color is important for a pilot because of the way it's designed in the cockpit or for the cockpit, then all vendors should be using the same color. And there shouldn't be an inconsistency in that. So we did studies assessing general aviation pilot perception of changes in METAR symbology and airport visibility condition. That's the first study we did. And there you have three different vendors, a depiction of three different vendors displaying the same information. And if you notice, you'll see the colors are different. And so pilots behave different when they see inconsistency with information that's being presented to them. We saw pilots misinterpret information. Like Gary said, they were not cognizant of when their destination airport turned IMC or IFR, and basically they continue to fly, which is dangerous. The second one, assess weather notification function to alert general aviation pilots of state changes in weather. So we figure out, hey, the guys are not, and gals, are not seeing when there's a change. So maybe there's a way we can give them like a notification. So the first one is an app we had on an iPad, and I witnessed that myself at Texas AMU, whereby when the METAR came on and you notice the colors you had for VFR, IFR, and marginal VFR, it alerted, basically notified the pilot, we don't like to use the word alert, notified the pilot of a change. The design was not very foolproof in a sense because it was more distraction. The pilot had to actually dig down to get the information. So then we tried, okay, if that's not working, let's try something else. So we came up with a wristband. Basically, the wristband was tied to when something changed in the display, it vibrated, and it got the pilot's attention. And we found that that worked to some degree. Of course, we had to figure out now the level of vibration that we need on the wristband to actually get the pilot's attention. And then the last one has to do with salience. So that has to do with how bright the whatever you're trying to display. For instance, the symbology. The brighter it is, the more the human eye is able to discern what it is. And so we found that that worked. And so now what we would do with this information is furnish industry and say, well, if you're going to display this information, here is the salience number that you should use if you want pilots to actually see the information. Cockpit applications, this one is called Active Reminder. And there again, I'm not going to read all the bullets here, but this was another way of actually getting pilots to figure out, hey, you know, we found out that most of our studies, pilots were flying closer to convection. You know, the recommended 20 nautical mile radius that they're supposed to stay at, or distance, pilots were not observing that distance, and they were flying closer and closer. I personally think that some of it has to do with a behavioral pattern that pilots are taking. They do it from time to time and they get away with it, and until they get bit by the bullet, maybe they wouldn't stop doing it, and it's, you know, it's very dangerous. So we did this study here, and I think the next one shows, I don't know, we don't have a mouse for this, right? But this is what the prototype display that we use, and you have the own ship, and then you have the line that shows the 20 nautical mile radius. And for some reason, is there a mouse? Okay, so unfortunately we can't show how it works because I don't have a mouse to do it. But actually what happens when you get too close to the 20 nautical mile, a blue line comes, a line comes out and actually gets your attention. So that worked. We saw pilots were more cognizant now. And like I said, this is not this is a prototype. We hope we can. Hey, it's actually working. It changed. There you go. So we can give this to. It also works with visibility too. So we can actually give this to industry, and they can look at it and say, okay, if I design something like this to notify pilots, here are some of the things I need to focus on. Of course, most of you are using handheld devices in the cockpit, whether it's a tablet, iPhone, or some other smartphone device, to look at weather information. How it's displayed on an iPad or a tablet is probably going to be different on how it's displayed on a smartphone because of the size of the screen. So you always have to take that into consideration. So we wanted to examine the potential benefits and effect on pilot flying behavior for use of portable weather presentations and the sensitivity to weather symbology changes. So there again, you know, and then we did some recommendations for mobile MET to industry. We write two sets of recommendations. One are for pilots and one is for industry. Pilot training. The WILD, Weather Information Latency Demonstrator. So for those of you, how many of you are VFR pilots? Okay, very few, but you had to be a VFR pilot before you became instrument rated. So a lot of pilots today are using some application like a NextGen or something to get weather information. But a lot of pilots are not cognizant of the delay or the latency that's within the application of itself or what's been presented to them. It could be as 5, 10, or 15 or 20 minutes old. And we work with NTSB, like I said. They had an accident where, you know, the pilot was looking at NextGen and the information was old and actually ended up killing himself. So we're working closely with Center of Excellence, Pegasus, which is a group of universities. They're on a grant from the FAA. because we don't have all the answers, so we also rely on academia and other industry officials to help us out with our research. And they came up with this thing called the Wild. We have it displayed in the FAA Safety Center behind this wall. If you guys want to fly it, it's okay. It's a way of conveying to pilots that what you see out the window, that's real. What you see on the display has latency. So don't fly your airplane based on what's on the display, unless you know how old it is. And most of you, I'm sure if I ask you what the timestamp means on that display, you probably won't be able to tell me. Because it has a lot to do with how the composite was put together and when the last piece of data actually hit that display. And then sometimes it has a lot to do with the time that the display takes to actually present that to you. So we're hoping this is a way of educating pilots. We have some industry interest in it, and so we're hoping that we can transition this into industry and they can incorporate it into their flight simulators and their training devices. And I think I'll do this one and then I'll turn it over to Gary. So this here, I was just talking about NextGen. This is a course that was designed by Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, for those of you who know that famous university. And this was done on a grant from the FAA. And the reason why they did this again, because pilots lacked the knowledge and understanding capabilities of NextGen, like I just said. And so what they did, they designed a course, and first what they did, they test pilots on who didn't take the course on NextGen, and then they had some that did the course, and then so when we got the results, because it was only Embry-Riddle students that did it, my colleagues over in AFS, they said it did not represent the true population of pilots, so we needed to go out of the academia and actually test the pilots within other areas. And they did that, and the results were basically the same. Once the pilots took the course, they did better, they performed better, and the course, the link for the course is at the bottom of the presentation. So you guys can actually go to if you go to the FAST website and you just type in NextGen, it'll take you to the course. You'll see the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University course. And I'm going to hand this over back to Gary. Thank you. Here.
Right back on, yeah. And I want to point out, how challenges come up. When we did the active reminder, and you have to think about it coupled with latency. We were talking to Aspen Avionics, just as that just happened, was a company we were talking to, and he was very interested in doing something like that. He thought that was a really good idea, and he said one of the challenges is, but the information I get is latent. How am I supposed to know when I'm at that 20 or whatever the number is, because the information coming in is latent? So those are the kind of challenges he brought out that, we did it as it works in a lab, and when you give a pilot a blue line and he knows he's 20 nautical miles, it kept him much safer. But then we do have that challenge is that because the information is latent, we don't know over that next 5 to 20 minutes how much the storm is actually going to look different. So that's one of our next challenges in trying to come up with a way of doing something like that.
Yeah. Can we get a question over here?
Thank you. Thank you very much. With respect to latency, but I try to get your attention a couple of slides.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
You did invite us to engage.
Yes, absolutely.
Otherwise, I'll sit down.
No,
okay.
Absolutely.
So I think the idea of somehow getting our attention as pilots as something has changed, that's an excellent idea. We don't want to spend any more downtime, especially if we're flying VFR, like I do most of the time. So my question is, as part of your research, have you applied the criteria to which that wristband or whatever method you're going to use is applied? In other words, I don't want a zip, zap, zing constantly. Are you looking at criteria if it goes from moderate to severe? Now that's serious. But yeah. I could be getting zips and zaps, all day long. So
I'm going to answer this. I know you want to, but I want to answer this because I was amazed with this. It's funny. You should be a researcher. So when we first did this, it's really funny. We were looking at data. We got plots, and we used different methods, and it was to notify the pilot. And when I looked at the data, if you gave him a ding, a bell goes off. The reaction time was so far superior to everything else we checked. And I was like, Well, that's simple. You give them a ding. Look at the reaction time. Well, it turned out when we ran the experiment, it was such a priority, pilots stopped flying the airplane and they were actually losing altitude because a ding went off to tell them there was a problem, that they were almost within 20 nautical miles. So what a lot of this research was, because of just what you're talking about, is to encode it. So when the thing buzzes, it actually has a 3-level encoding to tell you something you need to do really quick, or else you need to do it, but you got time, and the other is just, hey, be aware. And the pilots actually really found that getting that prioritization, mentally, that's one of the tasks pilots are actually very good at, is prioritizing work. Pilots are very used to having a lot going on, and when they're given the information to say something's either critical or it's benign, they really do a good job, and that seemed to work really well, and those are how the recommendations for coming out. But it's funny, not being a human factors, when I saw that, I was thinking, oh yeah, give them a ding. Boy, they react like that, man, they know what to do. But you're exactly right. You have so many other things that are more important than when you're still 21 nautical miles away that you don't necessarily want it that much. So we actually did exactly that, and the recommendations cover it.
So let me add to that. One of the things when you're designing anything for the cockpit, you want to ensure that it's not a nuisance or annoying. So you have to take that into consideration. It's obvious. I mean, when I was flying and I took off and I heard the stall warning horn go off, it got my attention. It means I had my nose up a bit too high, and I was going to stall if I didn't do something about it. I've flown airplanes where people actually pull out a circuit breaker because they didn't want to hear the stall warning horn. So anytime you're designing something, you need to factor that in, and you don't want it to be a distraction. So with the one with the tablet that I showed you, that was a distraction because the tablet was over here, and where you put it, it has a lot to do with it too. If it's not in line of sight, or if it's in a corner out to the side of the pilot, now he or she has to move his attention. The guy moved his attention to interface with the tablet, and while he was doing that, his airspeed was going whack, his altitude was going whack because he didn't have an autopilot, so he actually had to fly the airplane. And if I had a choice, I'd fly the airplane first, and then I'll deal with that later. So yeah, you do have a very good point, and we do appreciate it. Thank you.
And just a quick follow-up.
Yes.
As I said, I think what you're doing is wonderful, and it's probably going to help if we can find an industry who will try to take it on. But I just want to encourage, I know your research. You're not aviation weather programs, but you are FAA. And please, if you can, remember that we do already have some systems that are out there that help us as pilots to be alerted to, not a zap on the wrist or whatever. HIWASs, air traffic control, it's mandatory in their orders to broadcast when there is a new HIWAS. And we all get that, so we know, oh, okay. So that's auditory, and we're used to seeing that, but with our VORs being decommissioned, HIWASs are going away with the VORs that are being decommissioned. And the sources of information that we have like that, again, I know your research, you have nothing to do with this, but you do participate with other aviation weather organizations within the FAA. I would just ask to please try and retain whatever services we do have out there right now that help the pilots. If you're doing away with the VOR, keep the HIWAS. If you're doing away with the VOR, keep the ASOSs and AWOSs that are broadcast on the VOR.
One of the sister, and thank you very much for that comment or suggestion. So one of the, actually we're two programs. There's an AWRP, which is Aviation Weather Research Program, and they handle that. We're under the same management. So, we can take that back to them, the feedback that we got, and we can figure out what they're going to do. But I know there's going to be phase, and as stuff come on board, they're going to phase stuff out. I mean, we had VORs, they may be going away. You got people who are using DMEs and stuff like that. But, the dynamics are changing, and it's like automation, right? So years ago, you had to fly the airplane yourself, then you got autopilot, then you got automation. But you still have to maintain your piloting skills, and sometimes you still have to maintain the basics. So we have to find a way to work with them. And if something goes away, I don't think they just take it away like that. They try to ensure that whatever's going to replace it is either better than what we had or comparable, rather than just phase it out like that. But that's a very good point. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I was just going to add to that. For when you were talking about the VORs going down or going away, for those of you that want to know more about that, that process is all going to be discussed at 11:30 on Saturday in the VOR Mon.
There you go.
What a shameless plug. So, and one other thing I want to emphasize, which is something we're really actually very proud of and why we've worked well with industry.
Question over here.
Oh, sure. Oh. So I just wanted to say, when we do a recommendation, and the best one as an example is the Wild, we don't expect industry to take what we build. What we do is we give them the performance, we ran checks, and we actually have data to show pilots learned better and understanding of the latency and made better decisions with that. We want them to take the capabilities of that and incorporate it into their own designs. And that's an example where it saves people money. If we told them, do what we did, prices would be twice as high. They're taking those performance capabilities and looking at integrating it into their own systems, using their own methods. So we don't drive up prices that way, but they see that capability is worthwhile. Yeah.
Need a microphone. Thank you.
We're coming. Hold on 1 second.
Okay. He's running.
So you made the comment about the latency, and if you ask all the pilots, many of us wouldn't know what that actually meant. Is that problem too hard to solve? Or it seems to me, if you could tell me, here's a latency number, and I know that's how delayed it is, that would help me a whole bunch more than telling me how to explain latency and what I see out the window isn't what I see in the cockpit.
Well, okay.
So is that
I can. There's a few answers. These are what we're looking for. We actually have good answers, a couple of them. But I first want to ask you, and this isn't really to put you on the spot or anything, in all honesty, just kind of curious because we've heard some of this. If I tell you the information in your cockpit, you have an XRAD display, you see a storm, and I tell you it's 15 minutes old. Every time, that is 15 minutes old. What are you going to do with that information? What would you do knowing it's 15 minutes old?
Well, I have to take the motion that I get and try and extrapolate where it's going to be in another 15.
And see, that's the problem.
If I start with that. But I know that it's not 15 minutes old.
Well, no, what I'm telling you, here's the thing, and if we have a film...
if you tell me that it will be 15 minutes old, then I won't make...
But, because I'm going to answer your question two ways. One, the problem people have, and we've seen that, if they understand or they hear the number of latency, there is a belief that weather is linear. You can't forecast growth and decay, which is the bigger issue. In 15 minutes, that storm could look completely different. There have been a number of cases recently, if people have read in the papers, where commercial airlines flying forward-looking radar have gone right into hail because the storm changed. It wasn't because of delay and latency. Weather is dynamic. In 15 minutes, a storm that looks like this can look completely different. And that's what we've seen a lot of pilots doing, is they think, I'm watching it move, I see it going like this, it's 5 minutes old, it's here, oh, it's 10 minutes, it's here. That'll get you into more trouble than anything else. Now, one thing we are looking at, and we're actually going to run a study here, is to answer your question, well, why do you have latency? Well, we can actually null it out. We can give you real-time data. And what that real-time data does, the way we're doing it is we can use models. It's not just move it, and the models can predict growth and decay. Not 100% though. So your choice is, and we're going to run an experiment and see what makes better decision making. I can give you 100% accurate radar data that's, say, 15 minutes old to pick a number, but it really, like you said, it ranges because of the way the sweeps work. Some of the data is current, some of it may be 20 minutes old on your display. Or I can give you current information, but it's got forecast information, so it may be 95% accurate, say 90%. Which would you rather fly? Information that's current, but has a forecast and is not completely accurate, or information that's a perfect picture, but it's 15 minutes old? We want to see what makes for a better decision. The reason we're doing this, we have some belief, and we're curious to see, is that pilots understand inaccuracy more than latency. That you don't trust, that most people don't trust anything 100%. So when you look at a display, no matter how accurate you think it is, you're like, it's still a display. You know, things break, and you understand that better. Latency, you can make these misperceptions. Oh, it's moving like that. It's 5 minutes down the road. So we're going to compare that. So we're actually doing that. We've gone through and developed algorithms with the with NCAR, National Center for Atmospheric Research, and we're doing that right now. We've developed the ability to null it out, and we're going to start an experiment probably in fiscal year 19 to actually see which way pilots perform better and what they understand more, whether they prefer the latent weather or the nulled out. Outside of that, until you just get faster radar sweeps, there's always going to be some delay because it's built with a composite, and you've got to do it serially right now. So until the Aviation Weather Research Program comes up with a way to have one massive radar that takes one picture, there's going to be some amount of delay in there. So we can't give you yet, unless you buy a forward-looking radar like 121s typically have, you're not going to get that real-time picture. So it's going to be one or the other. But it may be that nulling out the latency actually enhances decision-making.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll try and speak loud.
We got plenty of mics.
Yeah, thanks.
There's no rush. We got plenty of time.
Yeah, with that, if you're modeling future to pull in latency down to 0, do you study the accuracy of your model?
Yes,
Because
that's how,
the
as
other-
we've did
the
the
other-
algorithms we're using, that's exactly what we did. Now, what we're doing right now is
Well,
we
can
have
I-
not
well,
perfected those yet.
The basis of my question is, right now I look at TAFs, MOSs, local weather, hour by hour weather, all sorts of, the briefing dump, and the weather doesn't agree. And so these different models, they themselves don't agree, depending on how far they are in the future, the model that they're based on. So with the tool of saying, okay, I'm going to bring latency in, isn't accuracy of that forecast highly important?
Absolutely, but and this is another challenge which I don't know how many of you think about, but think about it. If I say what to you is the accuracy of weather? If I tell you you're going to have a thunderstorm at 3 o'clock over point A, if it thunderstorms at 2:58 and it's over point A, did I make a good forecast? If it's more severe or less severe, how do I rate it if I hit the right spot but the wrong time and the wrong bomb? It's so hard to quantify accuracy. But in fact, the algorithms that are being used do have certain accuracy ratings that meteorologists use, and that's exactly what we're trying in the experiment. You're actually talking what I challenged NCAR to do. My concern with running this experiment is I want pilots to understand, and it's very hard. I don't even know quite how they're doing it, but they worked on it for me, is to be able to explain to you what you're looking at on this nulled out display. So you exactly have some idea of what that inaccuracy is. I can tell you, okay, it's off a forecast, and that'll give you something, but you need to have a little more idea of what that means to have some idea how much to trust it. And that's actually a very big challenge, and they were really struggling with ways to quantify the uncertainty in there or that error so you could judge it. Do I trust it, and how much should I trust it? But they claim, I just talked to them the other day before coming here, and they have come up with a way they feel to convey what you're actually looking at in the nulled out display and to quantify in some manner that uncertainty. Very good question. That is a huge challenge in weather. Like I said, if you ever read and just go to Wikipedia and look up weather accuracy, it's pretty wild when you try to talk about what's an accurate forecast. Anything else? I mean, these are great questions.
Is there any way when you do this that you can predict cloud tops?
What was that? I'm sorry.
Cloud tops.
Cloud tops? Is there some way that you can predict cloud tops in this stuff?
Predict. We use satellite information and cloud tops, obviously, for various products. I don't know. Unfortunately, our AWRP person isn't here, who is the meteorologist, and I am not sure what you mean exactly.
So
Maybe you know.
I can answer
Maybe
that
you can
question.
help.
So the FISB, flight information broadcast, our system, our services from ADSB, I think are coming out. Actually, I think those products are probably out by now. I think it's 5 or 6 different products, new products to add to the suite of products, and one of it is cloud tops. I would advise you to talk to the guys at ADSB. We have it in a presentation here.
But that gives cloud top. That's not forecasting.
That is not. That just gives it the cloud top information. It doesn't forecast it. So I don't. Yeah. Yeah, it gives
you get the actual cloud tops.
It displays the information on.
We're actually doing that in Oceanic. We're
Yeah.
flying with the 121s because they don't have a lot of. There's no radar coverage out in the ocean, so we're actually using cloud tops and another product called Convective Diagnosis Oceanic to predict the center of convection off of satellite data as well. So we're doing that in Oceanic for the 121s. Great questions, man.
Go ahead.
Okay, so this one, actually, even though he gave it back to me, this is more your area, so you should talk. This is the human factors person at your university.
Not my university. I attended it. That's not my university. So one of the things that one of the gaps we looked at is pilot training. And it was brought to our attention, of course, most of you know, all you need is 70% to pass. And you can fail all the weather questions, knowledge questions, and once you get a 70% in your written, you're good to go. So we decided that first of all, AFS 630, which is the group that actually do the weather question or the knowledge questions for the private commercial and instrument tests, they had asked us to actually supply them with some weather knowledge questions, probably 100 questions or more. Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, they were tasked with developing these weather questions, knowledge questions. And one of the things I wanted them to do is to do in-depth analysis on the questions, like content analysis, look at the questions to see if it's asking the right question, what you're trying to get from the participant or the person who's taking the test. We also wanted to see things like if a question is being missed on a regular basis, is that question a good question or not? Or if people are getting that question right all the time. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do that, so they came up with 95 questions of their own, which are a little different because once they turned the 100 questions over to the FAA, they couldn't use them anymore. And so they came up with those questions, and they had participants, like I said, who was from a student pilot all the way to commercial instrument rating. And here are the results here. Student pilots scored low on weather knowledge compared to other groups. Of course, it makes sense because the more ratings you get, you probably be better equipped with knowledge of weather. And commercial pilots scored highest, of course. All groups score higher on weather source questions, and overall scores reveal that pilots need more training on basic principles of weather, phenomenon, and weather products interpretation. So the next slide, and we have more than one of these slides, but we elected to use this one here. So this came directly from the study that Embry-Riddle did. We didn't change anything. This is a slide I pulled out from their research that they furnished us with. And if you notice there, surface charts and upper level charts scored the highest. Of course, the convective segment, they got 64, but everything else was in the 50s. So basically, everybody that scored 50, or all the areas that scored 50, they actually failed. So what are we going to do with this information? It's obviously that we need to do a better, we need to do a better job in teaching pilots weather. Pilots are not meteorologists, so we cannot teach them things like you would teach a meteorologist or teach them as if they're meteorologists. A pilot needs to know how the weather impacts his or her flight. You need to know it's impact you and your airplane because you know your capabilities and limitations. You also know your airplane capabilities and limitations. You know, one of the things we're suggesting is that don't tell me how to interpret the weather, just show me where the weather is and tell me not to go there. No, that can work. There may be some legal binding behind it because if the guy goes there and something happened, then it comes back to bite the individual to tell him not to go there. But at the same token, pilots need to still do their homework. You know, before I fly, I look at the weather information. I used to call the weather brief to get it on the phone, and then I make my own judgment. And nobody's going to force me to fly if I don't want to fly. If I see the weather is not what I think it is, then I'm not going to go. I'll wait another time. So what Riddle is going to do with this here now, we talked to AOPA, so they know about it, industry knows about it, and we need to find a better way to deal with the areas that pilots are weak in. This one here, experiential education learning, and it says learning by doing. So this is a study that is being done by Pegasus, which is a center of excellence, Purdue University and a few other universities, the Ohio State. and basically improve judgment and decision making for pilots. And these are gaps that we found. And there's a previous research that we did in 2015 that found the use of weather knowledge training modules to enhance GA pilot skills related to VFR and IMC did not significantly improve decision making. We did the one in VFR and the IMC too. Basically, we looked to avoid operations in IMC. Pilots need to assess when weather conditions are deteriorating. They need skill to accurately assess visibility and recognize changes. So we came up with this experiential modules, training modules. And basically what it is, we teach you in the classroom, and then we actually have you do it. And for most pilots, you can learn all you want in the classroom, but you still have to apply that knowledge in the cockpit. So you teach, you do, you teach, you do, and that's how you get better, by rehearsal. I don't know if you want to talk more about this. I think we can go to the next slide.
I'm going to put one shameless plug. So I have here, and if you stop by our booth, one of the things we've done, and I don't know whether it'll show up on here yet, we've developed an app that lets you, sort of works like Shazam. If you don't know something, take a picture. And we have a prototype, and this booklet, if you come pick it up from us, it'll tell you how to download the app, and it has things. And the last back page is called Estimating Visibility. And if you click on this with the app, once you load it, it's going to bring you direct to one of the training modules that's experiential education, and it's on visibility. And it's actually excellent. If anybody really is motivated to take some training, I recommend doing it. I hope the link works. I was trying to do it here, and I think it's because we had a lack of information. We are going to have the university here tomorrow to make sure that link is working. But the app is really cool. You can take, you'll see all the things you can now do. We're also giving a coupon if you fill out a survey. We picked areas we think pilots might want it. And basically, it gives you a whole encyclopedia by just clicking on images. If you're looking at something related to weather and you don't know what it is, take a picture of it, and it'll bring you to an educational site to answer your questions. They're in more plain language. They're not like some of the tools NOAA and National Weather Service put out that sometimes are more geared towards meteorologists than pilots. So it's a really slick tool, and we're looking for feedback so we can go from a prototype and move it into an actual tool that provides all the services pilots need.
So let me make this statement and I'll let you go back. So here's an example. So one of the things that we have in the booklet that Gary just talked about is you have a sectional chart, which most VFR pilots use, and you have your route of flight on the sectional chart. So you can take your mobile device, and once you get to download the app, and it'll actually fly that flight for you and give you an understanding of what the weather is going to be like. So like you have a visualization of what the flight is going to be before you actually go on the flight. And I think that's pretty cool, actually.
The good thing about it is one of the demos we did, it's through like a gorge, and we have that on there, and it narrows. And if you actually do this virtual reality and fly the route, you can see that, hey, if the weather's decaying and I go too far down, I can't turn around. There's not enough room. So it gives you that sort of experience. If you're flying somewhere you've never done before, you actually get to see the terrain, where there's hiccups, where there's problems, where there'd be challenges. So hopefully you can do a better job of making a good decision based on weather forecasting and what your own skill sets are.
And we have a video running out there. If you guys get a chance when you're passing by our booth, you'll see this guy was flying the Alaska scenario where Gary just said he's flying down the gorge. This was actually in a simulator. A 172, he was flying at Purdue University, and I was at the back observing. And he had his iPad on his knee, and we had them actually enunciate or verbalize what they're doing. That's how we capture their thoughts. And he kept saying he had to report the visibility. So I think we started him off at 15 miles, and then we degraded it for every waypoint they reached. And he kept saying 4 miles, 4 miles, 4 miles, and I'm saying it's less than 4 miles. And he had a lot of heads down time looking at his tablet, and eventually flew into IMC conditions. So in a real world situation, he would have been dead. Go ahead, Gary.
So this one, and I'm not going to run through, there's we can hand this out, and there's stuff on there. A couple of things we have found. Judging visibility from an aircraft is difficult, and we ran a test. We had 3 groups. One we trained using charts how to do it, one we did nothing, and one we taught them this little technique we call slant ranging, which is basically the old method of triangulation. when we did the survey, approximately 1/3 of the pilots said they'd never been trained, and they basically, when they're up, they just guess. They look out and they think something's such a distance. And there's all sorts of research, not just in aviation, that people are not very good at doing that. And the data actually showed that. So when we taught this simple rule of thumb, and I won't go into the details, it's like I said, it's basically triangulation where you can look over the nose of the aircraft, you know the angle you've measured before, and you can get a tangent. It actually was extremely accurate, and like I said, the pilot, the results, the group that did the slant ranging were over 50% more accurate consistently than the other two groups. So it provided a very simple tool. I'm not a pilot. I tried it in the cockpit, and I was dead on every time. I mean, I was off by less than a mile just using the simple technique. And pilots it's not something that gets taught. There's other methods, I'm sure, but this is something we're trying to just put out there. It's really easy to do. If you take your aircraft on the ground once, you'd make a couple measurements if you want to be exact, or you can even use a simple rule of thumb if you have a typical aircraft that doesn't have some weird configuration with the nose, and it'll probably be pretty good. Augmented reality, this is the app I just told you about. Since we have it here, there's some videos here, but basically, like I said, what this is doing, it's linking to advisory circulars, all sorts of information. You just click on something that you're curious about, the app will take you there. We're trying to get people to do it, and these are some examples. You can go to, we have an overlay for aviation weather, and it's showing you what kind of thing you can get when you click on it. But this will take a while, so I don't want to run through all of them. But we have the app here. Like I said, please come by our booth and pick up a booklet, download it, play with it. It's really slick. This is one I actually am having fun with. Does anybody here ever use VNR? Have you guys called flight services? Does anybody still use VNR? Okay, well, that's in some ways good. So VNR, for those, what it's typically done, it's only provided by voice right now by flight services. And a while back, IOPA actually did a study on VNR and found that for VFR pilots, I think they said over 60% of the time when they were told it was VNR, it positively impacted their decision in that they either didn't go or they would make changes to their routes to avoid being in a condition where a flight service expert was not recommending VFR flight. The problem, which seems to be over time, now that they've consolidated flight services, it's a very subjective, I don't know what you call it, condition where a flight service person says, hey, it's VNR, I don't recommend it. And we just recently ran a study. AOPA came to us and said, you know, we see this thing has a lot of value based on old information. We believe it's over forecast. We don't think pilots are using it because they think guys covering themselves are just saying everything's VNR, and it's losing that value. We need you guys to take a look. So we actually just finished an experiment that the data is really very surprising. Turned out Flight Service 1 was not more conservative than pilots. The pilots were actually more conservative. But what we did find is that Flight Service is not very consistent in how they do it. So depending who you talk to, you got a wide variation, even though they're supposed to be experts, which is not what we're really wanting. Now, it's understandable because, again, there's no training. The guidance is basically look at things and give a recommendation. So we're now going to take a much harder look at this and decide how much is it being used, what value does it have, and how can we make it more objective. So we got a lot of data on how each pilot and each flight service specialist made their decisions, what drove them to say it's VNR, and we're going to see moving forward, we're talking to a variety of groups to try to decide what's the best approach to either retire VNR if it's not used or make it more useful, that people understand why it's being issued and what the criteria are, so that for somebody who hates weather and flies VFR, they get a good recommendation. And that's really what it's designed for. You're not a weather guy. You want to call an expert, and he gives you sound advice. Should you go? Not overly conservative where you never go. Oh, I'm in Florida in the summer. Yeah, there's a chance of rain. Your VNR, don't go. You'll never fly in the summer. Thunderstorms every day. You know, that isn't helping people either. So we're really trying to come up with an objective way to do this. AOPA has been working very closely with us on this. This is something that their membership is really pushed on from the VFR flights. And like I said, the data is really interesting to see how people came up with this. So we're still evaluating this. And then this one, I'm only going to touch on, this is kind of fun stuff. This is a little more what research can do. Basically what we're doing here. Oh, we have a question?
A question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just looked at the podium.
I like whatever you could do to enhance that and make that as good as possible. But at least experientially, or from my point of view, I'm a visual learner. So much of the data that we have gotten historically has been digital, auditory, and so that's very difficult for me to translate into what I'm going to do. So I think everything that looks like is moving to now is visualization.
There's a lot more graphical, certainly.
And I think, for me personally, that's the way I learn. So that's a great enhancement for me. I still think you ought to see if you can enhance the other issues as well, because other people learn in other ways.
Right.
But for me, it's the visualization.
Yeah, and I want to be careful what I say here, because it is out of my area. We don't have the AWRP. But and maybe you guys know this. One of the things I've sort of heard notionally, because you said, yeah, not everybody likes graphical products. Some people are more comfortable with textual. What I've heard a little bit is sometimes when you take two products that provide different representations, they don't always show exactly the same information. And some guys go to like the old site where it's text and the new site where it's graphical, and they're not exactly the same. And that seems to cause a lot of consternation. So that's not a WTIC issue. That's AWRP Weather Service to try to make all products, the rendering not impact the data, but I guess in some cases that's difficult depending on the processing and what's done. So I know there's a little bit of trouble that I've heard. Like I said, I'm not going to claim this is 100% accurate, but I've just notionally heard some of this as an issue. So I don't know if you've experienced that, if you use both, that, hey, I look at both and it's like, why aren't they telling me exactly the same thing? And they're both weather service products. Yeah.
So that's a very good observation. And yes, we are shifting towards more visualization. Like I just said earlier, that show me where the weather is and tell me not to go there, rather than give me a bunch of text like METARs to interpret. But we also have to realize it's not a one-size-fits-all, because I would personally, and that's where we're hoping we can go, is to basically give the pilot information based on phases of flight. So when you're on the ground, you have all the information you need. You can make your flight planning and everything else. As you take off and you get airborne, you only need information that's going to help you along the route of your flight. And then as you get close to the airport, we give you get the information you need. But you can also customize that if you want to, when and where you need the information. But there's some people that say, well, give me the whole kitchen sink and let me figure it out. I don't want to be told what to do. That's a different story altogether. So we have to be very careful. We don't want to take away the information from you, but we want to give you the information in a way that you're able to manage it, basically, and decrease on your workload as you fly, especially for those of you who do single pilot operation. So that's a good observation. Thank you.
So what I'm showing here is, this is primarily in Alaska, but the webcams are coming down. I don't know if any of you flown, but in Alaska, the FAA has a webcam site. They've got webcams all over the state, and the pilots love it, but you can't really send it up to the cockpit. It's not really conducive to look at a bunch of video, try to determine what the visibility is. It's great for flight planning, and the pilots like it. So we've been going, well, we've got this great system. What else can we do with it? So what we're trying to do, and we've actually done it successfully, is have people on the ground using crowdsourcing, which is basically a group of people look at the pictures, they analyze them, they set them, and based on the crowd coming to a consensus, we got very accurate visibility information. We can then have digital values to this. It can give us trending information, and then we can send this up to the cockpit in areas where right now that information is available. So just using the webcams, we're able to actually produce visibility. We're also looking, it appears that we can do it for sealing as well. So we're trying to take infrastructure that's there without buying new systems. A lot of this stuff isn't available to put ASOS all over Alaska. In some cases, the infrastructure doesn't like it. Or down in the Gulf where they fly a lot of missions, there isn't a lot of radar coverage. We're able to use some of these techniques, and we can produce visibility and sealing information. And we actually did it for wind as well. For uncontrolled airports, using a windsock and a camera, we could calculate very accurately the wind by using analytics, having a camera position there. So we're trying to get data out of existing infrastructure, and that's some of the things we're using. Like I said, right now we're doing it with human evaluators. We're trying to fold in automation and find ways to get less human evaluators. But the other things humans can do, and again, here I'd kind of like a little feedback, One of the things we found, when you get an ASOS reading, if I can see that white sign back there that says non-smoking, my visibility is, I don't know, what is that, 50 feet. It could be completely socked in on both sides, but my ASOS is pointing straight ahead and I get a 50-foot or it's a clear day. We've talked to NTSB, and there seems to be a strong belief that at times those numbers can be misleading to pilots. It's a clear day, and then you go in and you find the mountains next to the place you're coming in are completely obscured. So one of the things a crowd can do is actually set tabs and go mountain obscuration, fog coming off the water. So now not only do you get a visibility number that's what you're used to, which is the definition of a white surface on a black thing that you can see at such a distance, or the amount of reflectivity in the weather as you do through an ASOS, whatever, you'll get that same number. But we can also give you a description of what's going on in the area you're flying to, just with little tab marks. So now you not only know the number, but it may be, hey, it's 20 miles straight ahead, but I can't see the mountain over here, I can't see the tower over here, everything around my landing strip is completely socked in. Don't assume it's a perfectly clear day just because I can see 35, just because the ASOS can see 35 miles straight ahead. So we think we can enhance safety by doing that. We're trying to come up with more ways of giving better information towards visibility for pilots. So we're going to be doing some studies on that, seeing what is it, if you're a pilot and you're looking at this, what's the information you want? What obscuration, what movement, what things actually, if you were sitting on the ground looking at these live images, would you take, and can we convey that information in a low bandwidth, intuitive method where it's tabs, things like that that you can look at in a split second and really have a visual of what you're going into instead of a single number. This is just giving you some idea of things we can do with these numbers. Once it's digitized, we can give you arrows to show trending. We'll have trends. We can show what things are along the route instead of looking individually, so you can be flying and see exactly where visibility is going up and down. So once we digitize it, we can do a lot with that information. This is just kind of showing different ways we can render it. We can tell you in different directions what the visibility is. We can actually even do some forecasting if we do the crowdsourcing wind, because we'll know what the winds are and where the visibility is degrading, and we can give you a little bit of look in the future. So it opens up a lot of avenues in areas that have nothing right now. And I want to touch one of my favorite things we're also doing here, and I say this because people always talk about how the government wastes money. Well, my $10 experiment is we took a picture of a 121 forward-looking radar, used a free online optical converter, converted it to digital, sent it down using the Wi-Fi in the back of the airplane, Google network, sent it to a processor, sent it back up, and they had a perfect weather image sent up to the cockpit that was completely accurate weather. We recreated it completely. And so we showed that just by taking pictures of a display in a 121, we could actually produce weather radar information that was accurate. And it cost us $10 to run that experiment and show it could be done. Guys in Alaska were like, God, we have nothing in parts of these areas. If you could produce that and we put satellite data with it, we'll have full weather coverage without buying a whole infrastructure. So they were going just like ready for us to put this out there, even though, again, we're researching, it's a long way to go. But something that simple can really produce some really good visibility, really good radar information.
Okay.
This is you.
All right, so the individual that talked about the cloud top, is he still here? I guess he left. All right, so the FAA has a few new products that are going to be fielded for FISB, and one of them is an ISIN product, SIP, FIP, and SLD. And so those products are being displayed on the ground for pre-flight, or formerly were being displayed on the ground for pre-flight. So pilots were using them for pre-flight. But now they want to use them in the cockpit, to use it in flight. So you just can't grab products from the ground and throw it on the glass and expect the pilots are going to try to figure it out, because you're competing with other products or other stuff that you're displaying on your MFD or your PFD. You won't have a standalone weather display. You may have a primary flight display for those of you who fly the glass cockpit, or even if you have a Garmin or something, you may have a moving map, something overlaid. It basically is an integrated display. So in order to do that, we need to figure out, okay, if we're going to bring this stuff into the cockpit, how are we going to display it, and how pilots are going to be able to interpret that information. So we did the study at the Atlantic City Tech Center. And if you notice the results, on an average, pilots were able to detect the update of SIP, FIP, and SLD in less than a minute after the information was updated on the weather display. So that information was sent to a group called RTCA, which is a standards committee, and they were able to put our research that we did, the information, the recommendations basically, into a document that industry would be using. So the next time you're viewing ISIN information in your cockpit, just remember it came out of the WTIC program. These are the other products that I spoke about, and there's a cloud top. Now, we haven't done any research with the cloud top and the lightning and the turbulence, the GTG. All right, so fun stuff. We always have to have future research and voice-enabled user interface. So all of us in the room probably have smartphones. Some of you have smarter phones, like iPhones. And, you want to find a direction. When we were driving up here from Milwaukee, you can actually talk to your phone, right? So you go to Google and you ask for the directions. Now, I've got an accent, so sometimes it takes a while before Google picks it up. Google is not that smart as yet. So, you tell that to the FAA. We're lucky we got here. No, we fly commercial. We don't want to be in the news. Anyhow, so we want to look at voice-enabled technologies to see how we can assist the pilots in the cockpit. So things like you can ask for weather information, or you can ask for certain things which would actually try to reduce your workload. But of course, before we do that, we have to ensure that it works. Comparing written test scores, I spoke about that earlier, whereby Embry-Riddle is doing this study. So they're looking at the test scores. A guy scores a 90. How does that translate to what he does in the cockpit in terms of performance? And then Gary spoke earlier about GA time to adverse weather, and basically what that is. Pilots use time for almost everything. When you plan your flight, you plan, okay, point A to point B, it's going to take me this amount of time to get there. You segment the flights, so you fly from here to there, here's how much fuel you burn, and all is based on time. So we figure if we give pilots, say, okay, it takes this time to get to that weather event, or how are they going to use it? And is it going to be a benefit? Then the last one is gap analysis and special.
I got to ask the woman over here, because I always have fun with the time, no weather alert. If we put death meter countdown and it goes 80, 70, would that be too distracting? You have 10 seconds, sort of like they used to do on Star Trek.
Impact.
5, 4 till impact.
Yeah.
Would that be a little too distracting, or would that kind of keep you guys away? So that was one of the ideas we were curious about. I always thought that might be a little too much of a attention grabber, that you'll sit there and watch the countdown. But, as you start getting below 10, you might start feeling a little nervous that you need to do something if you got 10 seconds till quote impact.
Yeah, we might offend people if we did that, but it's a good point. So the last thing we have here is the gap analysis and special operations for GA. So, general aviation is not just fixed wing. There's also helicopters that are doing GA operations. We have the HEMS group, Helicopter Emergency Services. So we need to look at that to see what type of weather information they need and how they use that information and how it impacts their operations. So these are studies that we will start very soon, and hopefully we get a chance to come back next year. We'll be able to brief you guys, but if not, it'll be on our website. And of course, like I said, we don't work in a vacuum. Here's a bunch of outreach partners that we work with, a lot of universities, but we also work with professional societies, Lockheed Martin, Frashka. We also work a little bit with international, not a whole lot. And then here are some of the publications. I'm a firm believer, if you don't advertise, nobody would know who you are. And so we try to get these, a lot of our research published. And here is just some of the articles or the magazines that you can find that information in. And I think that's the last slide. Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, you can throw tomatoes at me if you want. What about, and this is going to continue to increase, what about pilots for unmanned aircraft?
UAS.
UAS.
Okay,
drones.
so
They need
there's
to
a special division within the FAA that actually is doing UAS. Of course, there's going to be a weather component to that. I think there's someone in our office that's probably going to start to look at that because, you know, as the airspace gets saturated with UASs and they're competing with other manned aircraft, we have to look at that. And we have to look at the training that the guy on the ground, if you call him a pilot, an operator, whatever it is, what type of training they would have, you know. So that's something we have to look at.
I have a lot of concern with the weather just because when you look at pilots whose lives are at stake and the scores you see on the weather exams, when the guy's flying it and he's on the ground, how motivated is he really going to be to understand weather elements and take precautions when his life's not at stake? So we certainly have concerns, and certainly within the FAA and everywhere, UASs, I think, are being held in check. If it were left to industry, there's so much money chasing UASs that you'd probably see things flying all over the place. But I think everybody recognizes that there's still a lot of risks and unknowns and are trying to keep those dollars in check a little until the FAA is convinced that anything that's flying and where it's flying is safe. And we just had a forum the other week where it was we spent probably about 3 hours on weather and UASs having presentations at a Friends and Partners of Aviation Weather. So it's certainly being talked about.
And I guess finally, because we got to wrap it up, we're almost into our time. I'd like to thank everyone for participating here. We enjoyed the questions, but just don't leave it there. I mean, those of you who are AOPA members, you know, talk to AOPA because, like I said, we work closely with them. If you have a chance, come to our booth. If you want to have a sidebar with us, we're always here to help. And thank you very much, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the event.
Thanks, Ian.
Gary?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.